Dear Celestia, if my head doesn't stop hurting, my brain is going to do a sonic rain boom, complained Rainbow Dash as she smoothly hovered in the air beside Trixie and Fluttershy. How long have we been walking? 3 minutes, said Fluttershy with a small giggle. Even though she had nearly lost her friend this evening, she simply couldn't feel sad. Not only had she survived, but now Trixie seemed to be warming up to her. Fluttershy couldn't help but walk with a skip in her step. It's so beautiful out tonight, isn't it, girls? It makes me want to sing. Oh, but I wouldn't want to be too loud because of Rainbow Dash's headache. Maybe I could hum. She began humming to herself quietly. Rainbow Dash looked over at Trixie. How much longer do you think it'll take? Be patient, Dash. We will arrive short... Ow! Trixie tripped and fell over. Gah! My hoof! Trixie looked over. Oh my gosh, are you alright? Trixie's face showed pure annoyance. Yes, the great and powerful Trixie is fine. She stood up and hopped on 3 of her legs to the object she had fallen over. What in the name of Trixie? Is this what I think it is? The other 2 ponies crowded around the object and were immediately shocked and a bit grossed out. In between them sat a shining, ornate horseshoe. It was bent and covered in blood, and they all recognized who it rightfully belonged to. This horseshoe belonged to Princess Celestia, and both Dash and Trixie couldn't figure out what it was doing here. But Fluttershy knew. Oh my goodness, I think I just figured out what happened. She quickly turned to Trixie. What colors were in the rain boom? There was no rain boom, chided Dash defensively. Trixie looked at the rainbow-maned pony with another face of irritation before she thought for a moment. I believe it was light blue, mint green, and bright fuchsia. Fluttershy began to hop up and down a little bit out of excitement. Those are the same colors as Celestia's mane. The other 2 ponies looked at her incredulously. And when I went chasing after Rainbow Dash, I saw a silhouette of a pony hit you, and something dropped from it as it fell. This must have been what was lost. Trixie still didn't look totally convinced. Well, that would explain the blood. Rainbow Dash butted in. Then why wouldn't she stop? It's not like her to knock people out of the sky and ignore them. She rubbed her head gently as she talked. It's more likely to be a robber who dropped some of his ill-gotten loot. Like in Daring Do in the Stable of Doom, when the Professor Trotswell stole the... Trixie's not so sure that's the case. Rainbow Dash landed next to Fluttershy. Well, Twilight's house is just up ahead. We'll ask her what she thinks. She turned away from the group. I still like my Daring Do idea better, muttered Rainbow Dash under her breath. Luna was asleep once again, and like always, Nightmare Moon was there to greet her. But this time was very different. Instead of criticizing Luna for endless hours, she began to recite a quick and strange poem. Tick goes the clock while the moon is still in lock. The sun and night's sky will lose a friend over a talk. Inch by subtle inch, the future closes from atop. Not your sister or her friends will live to carry what I drop. Nightmare Moon looked at her with a satisfied grin, before she once again walked into the darkness of her mind. She felt the air rush around her, and she woke up, gasping for breath. At first, Luna was a bit startled not to see the familiar ceiling of her room, but she looked up at her surroundings and realized she was in a hospital. The walls were a dull gray, and the ceiling was a boring white. The only thing to break the monotony of the colorless room was a large square window. There were a few newspapers on the stand next to her bed, and she tried to pick up one with her magic, but her horn sparked out and nearly caused her to lose consciousness once again. She was bewildered. Luna hadn't registered any of her magical energy after collapsing in her sister's room, but she had barely used any at all. Where was it all going? Luna's hair was still in its natural form, which meant her body was completely deprived of magic, and she couldn't sustain her normal, eternal one. She kept thinking, why have I stopped generating magic? She pondered the question. Then she had a disturbing realization. I have to be generating magic. But something is using it, stealing it. She grimaced to herself. She didn't want to believe the Nightmare Moon could use her energy. But what if she could? This would explain why she ran out of magic so quickly, and now she was just a ticking time bomb. As soon as Nightmare Moon had enough energy, she could overtake Luna and reassume control. Luna thought about what she could do in her predicament. The elements of harmony couldn't fix her, and it was now only a matter of time before the dark side of Luna took over. The princess would have to make sure that Nightmare Moon was as far away from civilization as possible when that happened. That way, she could give her sister whatever precious time she could to figure this whole mess out, which Luna knew she must have already been doing. She looked out the window once more and stood up. Though she was magically exhausted, she felt physically fine. She stepped out of her bed and checked the room. She had it all to herself, like she had expected, but there were 2 figures outside the door, presumably guards posted to protect the princess. What they might not have realized is that it was they who would need protection from Luna. Luna turned towards the window for the final time, before she opened her wings and glided gently to the ground. As soon as she landed, the comfort of the hospital, she realized the air outside was frigid. From what she could tell, it was about 40 degrees out, which meant she was pretty far north. Celestia might have sent her to the relief institution up in Vancouver, which was a hospital reserved for loyalty and the very apex of aristocracy. In the distance, she could see the vast sprawling city that was Vancouver, and the frozen north being but a blur in the clouds beyond. She paused for a moment as she considered her course of action. Did she really need to flee? Was it even the smartest thing to do? She pondered these thoughts for a very long while, before deciding that she would have to delay Nightmare Moon as long as she could, no matter the cost. She took flight in the soft light of nighttime and began to make her way towards the icy wastelands beyond. Trixie stood in front of a residence that belonged to her former nemesis. The large, peaceful-looking tree billowed softly in the wind, its leaves singing like an arboreal choir. But Trixie only heard the ominous creaking as the trunk screamed at her to turn back. She dreaded getting dragged along this far. She stared feebly at the hallowed oak, while Rainbow Dash walked right to the door and turned around. She then knocked loudly on the door with her hind legs. "Twilight, it's Dash! Let me inside!" Trixie looked at her like she was crazy. "Dash, be quiet. It's nighttime. Some ponies are trying to go to sleep. You don't suppose your friend might be resting?" Fluttershy sat next to the shocked, purple-clad mare. "It's okay. Twilight ought to be used to her doing this by now." Trixie turned to her. "You mean to tell me she does this regularly?" Fluttershy began to paw the ground. "Well, with the new Daring Do book coming out next month, 2 or 3 times." "A day?" Trixie responded, incredulously. "An hour," Fluttershy said softly. "Even more during the daytime." "Come on, Twi. This is... Gah." She gripped her head in between her hooves before she continued her sentence. "Serious!" She banged with her hind feet a few more times, but the door swung open and revealed a tall white princess, standing over them with a stoic expression. If it weren't for Rainbow Dash's quick reflexes, she would have kicked her leg right out at Celestia. "Princess!" The 3 shouted in unison. In her mind, Trixie wanted to scream. She knew that coming to Twilight's was a bad idea, but it was her trademark likeliness for it to get worse as the world could make it. "What?" the princess mumbled, a bit impolitely, as she forced a gentle smile to her face. Rainbow Dash was the first to speak. Princess? We just wanted to see Twilight. Is she here?" Celestia nodded. "She is. But what is your business?" she said flatly. "We just need to borrow some of her magical expertise, Your Highness." said Fluttershy quietly. "She's occupied. However, I am capable of fulfilling whatever magic you may require." "You see, Princess, I was mysteriously swept out of the sky." Rainbow Dash paused for a reaction, but Celestia's face betrayed nothing. "Whatever hit me left a nasty cut on my head, but Trixie here was able to fix that." Celestia looked strangely at the royal blue unicorn. "But I still have this personality-splitting headache from the impact, and I was wondering if you could help me with it." The princess wasted no time in getting to work. A pure white beam erupted from Celestia's horn and snaked its way to the teal Pegasus. Within a few seconds, Dash's head began to clear of all pain. "Ah," she sighed dreamily as she fell to the ground. "Thank you, Princess. You have no idea how good I feel right now. It's almost like I never Rainbow Dash caught sight of Celestia's hooves from her spot on the ground. Just as Fluttershy had predicted, one of her back hooves was bare and slightly bruised. "Princess, where's your other horseshoe?" asked Rainbow Dash as she looked up at Celestia. "Now is not the time for discussion. I will consult with you later." "I know what it is, Princess. Why are you avoiding the question?" "Listen, there are more pressing matters in Equestria at this moment, and I require Princess Twilight to stay, and for you to kindly leave. I'm sorry, my little ponies." "No, Princess. I was nearly killed. By you! I deserve an answer, and I will not leave until I get one." "Rainbow Dash!" The princess was now using her royal Canterlot voice, point blank at the teal Pegasus. "The need of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and I am not sure how long Luna will last before she turns back into Nightmare Moon." All three of the smaller ponies stood before their princess in fright, before Celestia opened her eyes and realized that she had shouted her secret loud enough for all of Ponyville to hear. Fluttershy was cowering in the grass, and Trixie was flinching, trying her best to hide behind her purple attire. But Rainbow Dash looked shocked and on the verge of tears. Celestia lowered her head and let out a long, weary breath. "Well, now that you're aware of the issue, and if I'm lucky, so is Cloudsdale, I will no longer see a point in keeping any of this from you. So I humbly invite you inside, should you wish to aid your princess in our situation." All of the ponies were still shell-shocked from the sheer bellow that exploded from Celestia, but Rainbow Dash was the first to recover. "I'll help, just as long as you don't scream like that again," said Dash weakly, before Celestia stepped aside and Rainbow Dash entered the house. Celestia turned to Trixie with a face full of thought. "You had some bad blood with Twilight. Am I correct?" Trixie lowered her head and nodded slowly. "I assumed so. Twilight could have filled a novel with all the letters she wrote me about you." Trixie turned her head away from the princess shamefully. "I'm sorry for being a bother to you, Princess. I'll head home." "Not so fast," interjected Celestia. "Perhaps this could be your chance to clear up any animosity between the two of you." Trixie turned back towards her. "I will not force you to aid us, but I strongly recommend you do." Trixie was arguing with herself, in her mind once again. One did not simply say no to the princess, and it's not like she had much to go back to. Ever since Twilight outdueled her twice, her magic show had become the laughingstock of Equestria. No pony would take her seriously, and as a result she had fallen into some treacherous financial ground. She slept in her traveling caravan for a while, but after a pack of timberwolves ravaged the vehicle, she had been sleeping wherever she could find shelter. She looked up at the princess before sighing and nodding her head. She slowly walked inside. The only pony that was still standing outside was Fluttershy, and once she realized that there was no pony left standing beside her, she galloped frantically into the house, without paying any mind to Celestia. Once inside, they found Twilight sitting at the table that had been set in the center of the library. The purple unicorn's eyes were wide, and her pupils were narrow. A cup of tea sat in front of her, but her hooves made no move to touch it. Instead, they lay on the table in front of her, shaking slightly. Spike was next to her, but he looked distraught. His claws had left grooves on the brown wood, and his face showed nothing but worry. The three ponies took their seats around the table, while Celestia paced around the room. There was a long silence that hung like lead between them before Dash's voice broke the stiff air. So, Luna is going to have to go back to the moon. Everyone turned to her immediately. No, Celestia said evenly. She won't be banished to the moon again. Nightmare Moon is too strong for me to overcome. Dash looked around strangely. Are we going to use the elements? Zap her and then everything goes back to normal? Celestia turned towards Dash once more. No, she said quietly. Elements won't work. She lifted them to the table with her magic and threw them roughly on the wood, causing sparks of all colors to shower over the sides. They broke. Our race in the whole is completely useless, reduced to a few pieces of tasteless jewelry. She put her two front hooves on the table. This fight can't be won like the others. We need a plan, and quickly. There isn't enough time to mobilize the Canterlot Royal Guard. There isn't enough time to evacuate any of the major cities, and there isn't enough time to prepare for a head-on battle. Everyone in the room was a bit frightened by Celestia's violent demeanor. She was normally composed and level-headed and reasonable, but the severity of the situation simply left no time to be wasted. Our only option is to intercept Luna before she's overcome by Nightmare Moon, and... Celestia's lips began to tremble as a singular tear fell to the library's wooden floor. And then we take her life before Nightmare Moon can return. The room fell silent again. Everyone looked around sadly as the princess spoke of having to murder her own sister. Right now, she's being hospitalized just south of Vancouver. We will travel there tonight and finish the job. She had no words to speak for what seemed like ages. They simply exchanged glares with each other, with the exception of Twilight and Spike. Trixie looked at the princess. Why does she have to die? Is there no other way? I have known of her corruption for a long time. Discord had informed me long before signs began showing, and even then I had my suspicions. I know for sure that Nightmare Moon is gaining her energy. It's the only way she could break Luna's control. Twilight sat up in her chair suddenly. Princess, if you knew so early on, why have you chosen to do nothing up till now? Her voice was shaky and disbelieving. I was afraid that Nightmare Moon held the power to simply kill her on command. If she thought that there was a chance of her retaking control of Luna, she would have kept her alive. But if she knew I was onto her, she could have cut her losses and simply killed Luna the moment she knew. But now I realize she had no real power, and that that I've made a grave error waiting for so long. She turned away from the group. Now is no longer the matter of keeping her alive. It's a matter of landing a blow in time. The entire room looked towards the floor sadly. We leave in 30 minutes. Pack warm, as we'll be heading north. She walked to Twilight's fireplace and lit a small ember. Then she sat and stared with a melancholy expression into the small, blossoming flame. Celestia's words echoed in everyone's mind as they tried to let the emotional speech sink in. Fluttershy was sobbing quietly as she thought of the innocent pony that would have to die. And suddenly, she didn't feel so keen on humming. Rainbow Dash cast her eyes on the golden necklace that represented loyalty. It sat like an overpriced rock on the cold wooden floor, simply staring back up at her. She didn't think that she could represent her element in a mission that involved killing a friend. Trixie didn't believe what she had heard. She was sure that it was all a horrible dream, and that she would wake up from it at any moment. All of these horrors were just her questionably dark imagination, venting its jealousy, hatred, and other unpleasant emotions in a fantasy as evil as its protagonist. But she knew that there was no real escape from this nightmare. There was no escape from life, unless she grew weary of it herself. Twilight was the first to get out of her seat and walk upstairs. she gathered a small saddlebag and began to pack a few coats and other winter wear. It would be a cold night that far north, and she wouldn't want to be shivering when Celestia put to rest her own sister. Twilight paced around her bedroom. She felt so sorry for Luna. After she returned from her banishment, they had gotten to know each other pretty well. Whenever she would find herself in the castle, Luna would always be there to offer a helping hoof. She had aided her through some of the nuisances and helping her with castle conduct, and even began to teach her the royal Canterlot voice. She didn't think she would be able to stand by and allow her friend to die. The others were just getting out of their seats before Twilight's front door burst open, and a royal guard came bolting into the house. His armor was slightly askew, his eyes were wide, and his wings were slightly extended. "Princess! Princess! Terrible news!" Celestia jumped up from her perch on the floor. "Luna's gone missing. She disappeared from her room in the hospital." Celestia's mane billowed ominously as she stared into the guard's eyes. It was a long time before she answered. "I have once again made an error in waiting too long." The guard looked at her expectantly, silently awaiting orders. "Do not send any search parties out looking for her." "What? But, Princess!" "She will return, but not as Luna." The guard paused before he closed the door and left. Everyone looked at the princess. The only noise that could be heard in the library was the crackling of the fire that burned behind Princess Celestia. Her mane began to droop and wilt towards the floor as her head dipped in hopelessness. Now, we are truly out of options.